Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is kushalmehra. Tons of things are happening in the world right now. Donald Trump, as Navarro keeps calling India all sorts of things, Donald Trump finally called Narendra Modi and wished him a happy birthday. He called him Narendra by first name. That's very interesting. People calling each other by first name now. I remember Narendra Modi calling Obama Barack a while ago. So clearly some message is being sent, and then Pakistan has just signed this defense pact with Saudi Arabia. By the way, for those who follow this was going on for a while. You have to go all the way back to 2018 and then come back. But I just wanted to talk about this in light of this new Trumpian world order, where we are back to the old school. I will cut individual deals with everyone, and America is clearly giving its way to the other nations in the world to take. There are what I call the big four, and India being the lesser one in that. I will be the first one to admit that, but it's primarily between China and Russia, America and India. These are the four big economies and military powers of the world that can be taken seriously. So let's discuss everything that's happening. And I have with me Velina Tchakarova. Velina, how are you doing?
Well, first and foremost, Kushal, thank you for inviting me to your show to discuss all these relevant topics of global and regional geopolitics. It's great to be back. And second, I think that the timing is quite right, because when we were discussing the possibility of my participation in your show, all of these kind of new and interesting rapprochement between the US president and Prime Minister Modi hadn't occurred yet. So now I can brag a little bit, because I was quite clear in our conversation and also on social media when I said already a few weeks ago that Trump-Modi is still a very strong bond. I mean, there is a personal bromance between these two leaders. So when it comes to basically the perception of the importance of their nations, and there is a strong bond also in terms of personalities. And beyond that, what I actually think is that they will just get on the phone and they will move on. Clearly, there are a lot of issues in the US-India relationship. We will discuss this as well, especially where I see it headed in the next few months. But I just wanted to make this remark at the beginning that this is where we are in this Trumpian world. It's quite transactional, it's quite ad hoc. At the same time, there are very clear patterns. And if you understand the patterns, you will be actually ahead of the crowd in terms of specific foresight, as the example I gave from US-India relationship.
Now, on this India America bit, let's start there, and then I want to get into the other bits also. Now, you obviously were very clear. It's just a slight bump on the road, and once the repair work start, everything will be sorted. Do you think over here? Let's be categorically clear. These are two leaders with very giant egos. These are two leaders whose base, the domestic base, kind of likes the idea of them being slightly aggressive. That's a appeal point to both their bases, whether it's Prime Minister Modi's base or whether it's Donald Trump's base. They like the fact that their leaders are aggressive. In a situation like this, when it becomes an ego issue. It is very tough to break the ice. So don't you think in that sense the birthday call was the perfect excuse?
Again, this birthday call was surely a great excuse, but it was just a matter of time to happen anyway. So if it had not been for a birthday occasion, it would have been another occasion where these two leaders, rightfully pointed out, as you rightfully pointed out, quite strong leaders with strong ego. I mean, they have all the reasons to have a strong ego right now. If you take a look at the ambitions of the one and the other country, in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomics, both are, I mean, the one is still the only state actor with global power projection. We can debate this as well. I have my very strong opinion on the matter of the West, and which part of the West is actually aching and in decline, and which is actually having the ambition to undergo the necessary transformation to basically end up with a better outcome as compared to today. So the transatlantic community right now is on a very different track when it comes to these transformations. And then we have India, which is basically facing a lot of positive trajectories in the years to come, not only in terms of economic growth or in terms of, just the basic variables of macroeconomics, but also in terms of regional and global power projection, whether it's smart or soft or even hard power. So that's the reason why they have also this, next to the personal characteristics, they have the good reasons to actually have a strong ego about the ambitions, the national interests, and strategic goals of their countries. And we clearly see also the outcomes so far. I mean, if you take a look at the whole analysts calling the taco approach of Trump, remember how it was supposed to be an approach of Trump always chickens out, and then they wrongfully assessed the whole tariff policy towards the basically the rest of the world as just that, tariffs. Whereas I was claiming right from the beginning that this is the wrong way, the wrong lens to look at this, because it's not so much about tackle, it's more about actually geopolitical realignment, how to use coercion, how to use different instruments of geopolitics to exercise pressure on allies, partners, and, by the way, rivals as well, to achieve a certain outcome. And right now, those analysts claiming that Trump, went back in terms of tariffs on some countries, yes, but if you take a look from 0 going to 15% is still 15% more than, let's say, the originally announced 20 or 25%. And same goes for India, just to make a clarification that here again, rightfully, right now, Indians are very outraged about the 25% extra tariff on Russian oil exports to India, on top of the 25 tariff, which is why I argued that the 25% additional tariff is a tariff that will be removed one way or the other, because it's absolutely unrealistic to expect that this can hold. And at the same time, the other 25% tariff will be likely reduced to maybe something like 15%. And here we are. It's not going to be 0. It's going to be 15, which I think will be the best case scenario, which is by no means a tackle approach. It's actually the ambition of a leader. Whether it's a right or wrong policy, that's a different issue. But this is where we are. We have a leader who wants to achieve certain things, and he makes them happen. And everybody else has to somehow adjust to this reality. Whether, again, you are an ally or a rival, you have to adjust to this reality.
But yeah, I don't want to get into the details of whether Trump is right or wrong. Like, I'll say it. I think it's a stupid strategy beyond the point. But in the case of India, when actually Trump had made the first statement the first time that India is a very highly tariff nation, I was one of the first Indians to come up and say it's actually right, and we need to get rid of a lot of tariffs in India, and it's ridiculous to protect the Indian economy beyond the point. I was so confident that we should remove all the tariffs for Harley Davidson, because Indians will never buy a Harley Davidson. let them enter the Indian market. I was so confident, and because Indians already have a baseline with the Royal Enfield and many other options in India. As far as the India-America relationship is concerned, where I wanted to know your views were, I'd like, okay, it's maybe it's from the audience perspective, because like I talk to you, so I know what your views are and I follow your work. But how does it help when a guy like Navarro or a Bassett or all these people who go on these rants? See, these are like This is a completely new style of diplomacy. Now, Donald Trump is a celebrity host. That's what he was. A businessman who has gone bankrupt and come up again multiple times. He likes this, argumentative WWE sort of a diplomacy style. Do you think India handled that well, considering India never gave back a harsh answer? India never did anything. India just, kind of sat back and said, okay, okay, please keep going on, please keep going on. And while in the back, like, I know it for a fact, whether it was the Indian High Commission, which is the Ministry of External Affairs, or representatives from the Ministry of Commerce, which are nothing to do with the Ministry of External Affairs, different sets of people were continuously talking to folks in Washington DC, making visits to Washington DC without making any public announcements, talking all the time, while the Americans were apologizing to the Indian visitors, saying, these guys are crazy, don't take them that seriously, we are not like that, that kind of stuff. So do you think this kind of WW-esque kind of diplomacy is the norm now in the going future, or it just comes with Trump and goes with Trump?
You rightfully pointed out that there are different tracks of diplomacy happening right now. The hidden track of diplomacy is perpetual one. Basically, there have been delegations, American delegations, Indian delegations, meeting with each other all of the time, as we were witnessing this fiasco in terms of wrong statements. They were basically, if we look at Navarro's statements, there are so many things that are factually wrong that you will need days to just fact check all of these statements. Simply factually wrong. And then you remember what happened, how he actually was outraged about all this fact checking on X, trying to activate Elon Musk on the matter. Now, we have this public kind of diplomacy, which, in my view, this is not a diplomacy. You have a very aggressive and assertive administration team. So the core of this team around Trump plays a little bit this bad cop, good cop kind of approach, where on all different portfolios. So this does not go only in the direction of India. If you take a look at other portfolios or relationships with other countries, whether it's China or it's Russia, or it's actually even the European Union. So you have the bad cop, the good cop, and basically this is how they create also a lot of space for Trump to, enter, gets his ceasefires, gets his peace deals, and present, the final positive outcome. Or, as I said already, what is being described now as taco. So basically that he, goes back a few steps, and this is seen as a pushback, but in my view is actually just creating a psychological effect. So you have the bad cop, he creates the necessary psychological effect. The temperature gets higher, everybody's outraged. Then you discuss this the whole time, which is a kind of, I know it from previous times of Soviet diplomacy. It's something new, actually. We can refer also to some other business models of negotiations, but we don't want to do it now on the show, right? Who else is actually doing this kind of bad cop, good cop diplomacy? But you get the idea. So you have a psychological effect. You have someone's statements to be outraged about, and while you're actually busy being outraged, things are happening, and that's the reality. It's a very transactional period of international relations, and that's the way forward. So, unfortunately, I have not really good news for you. It's going to continue like that, and certainly we can argue that the damage, the perception of United States in India, the damage when it comes to the way how Indians are now perceiving Trump or perceiving America is there. But I don't think, honestly, that this administration really cares about it. I really think that what they care about right now is just the US national interest in all the necessary dimensions. So they would go actually even the way of antagonizing partners for
So
the sake of the national interest. And this is a very, I think, quite telling about the stage of international relations, where the US is openly telling everyone the masks are off. We are in a full scale. We are in a full scale competition with China in every possible domain, and we want to win this competition the one way or the other. So it's like winner takes all mindset, and we go to every corner and we'll do anything necessary to make it happen. And with India, they stumbled upon a really big challenge. And you rightfully pointed out, actually, when you said, India's position during these weeks of diplomatic escalation was just to sit calmly and wait for the storm to be over. And it was the right approach in a sense, because India is a very, very different swing state, to use the terminology of Goldman Sachs. So very different. I wouldn't use even the terminology of middle power, because it's incomparable in scale and scope. When you look at India and then you try to compare it with other middle powers or swing states like Turkey or Saudi Arabia or UAE, and so on and so forth. So it has its own scale, and in that sense, there was the right approach just to be calm and wait for the storm to be over. Because, and this is what I said actually, when I made this foresight, that the moment when they realize it's not going to happen, it's not going to work out the way it worked out with others. It worked out with the European Union quite well. It worked out with Indo-Pacific partners like Japan and South Korea. And to some extent, it worked out with China, but China is a very different chapter. We should not, put it in the same box to compare it with other relations. And in the case of India, what happened basically is that, they realized that there is an optionality, that India is ready to pay a very high price for its own strategic autonomy. So it's ready, it's willing, it's capable of paying this price. And then the optionality, which is normalization of relations with China, the strategic partnership with Russia, the global standing when it comes to, for instance, Global South, when it comes to every corner of the world right now, which is where India has a grand standing. So this, puts India in a very different negotiation position.
I wanna spend some time dissecting this word, the middle power, because I truly don't understand what a middle power means. Now, I stay in two countries, India primarily, and Canada for the rest of the year. Now, Canada is also a middle power. How? I don't know. I'll give you an example. Just last week, or this week, I think, we had a bomb threat of from three flights that came from Germany to Canada. There were planes getting scrambled in a matter of seconds from across the border in America to take care of Canada. A country that outsources, and this is my firm view, a country that outsources its military requirements to somebody else, almost 100%, gets called a middle power in geopolitics. That means that country is essentially a vassal state. It's a nicer way of saying I am a vassal state. Because if America says sit, I sit. If America says stand, I stand. I basically have 70% of my trade. Now, India is also called a middle power. I can tell you one thing that India will not have. Now, India may not have an economy like Canada in terms of GDP per capita and many other factors where Canada might be far better in terms of quality of life. But what India might have, which makes it a country, is that India actually has a fighting military. So when these terms are created in geopolitical analysis, how are they force fitted? You're the first one who's actually said India can't be called a middle power. I have often said that. that India is neither a superpower nor a middle power. I don't know what India is. We have to create a new word for India. But why do you think this oversimplification is done where a Canada, which has no military by own means, and there are only four real militaries, if you ask me, in the world: America, the strongest nation in the world, China, Russia, and India. These are four real militaries in the world. Pakistan, till some extent. I would give Pakistan Israel too. But where are the military? You can't rule the world without a military.
Yes. So first, of course, these are etiquettes. Basically, you need some sort of definitions which, for everyone, means something different. So middle power could, for instance, be a country that is a small size country, but at the same time has a great leverage over certain technology. That's, for instance, the case of Taiwan, which has a prolific leverage over a specific technology, which is the technology of the semiconductors. So if something happens to such kind of, concrete example of middle power, everybody will be affected to some extent. Now, that's one example. Another example why, for instance, Canada is defined as a middle power is because of its abundance of critical raw material, whether it's fossil fuels or other important raw materials. But these raw materials are still highly on demand, not just for United States, but also for the rest of the world. And there it is. It's a geographic position. Mostly it's about the geographic position. Are you located on a specific geographic position that is near to a choke point that would be, for instance, Strait of Hormuz, or would be Strait of Malacca, or would be the Red Sea, or would be the Black Sea. So you get an idea. Or Panama Canal, why suddenly Panama Canal was so important. It's not because, Panama is a kind of a middle power, but because of the location there. Suddenly it was about Canada, it was about Panama, and it was about Greenland. You see? So not every country in the world obviously is a middle power, but we have a lot of them. Right now we have a significant number of such middle powers with a different size in terms of geography, with different locations. Some of them have a leverage just because they are located, like, for instance, Egypt is located, not just near one of the most significant choke points, the Suez Canal, but it has, proximity to various military conflicts. You get the idea. So you have either an access to critical raw materials, or you have leverage over very important technology, or you have, ideally, as it is the case, and I agree with you, I wouldn't put India into this box of middle powers. To me personally, my definition for India right now is the only geopolitical bridge builder, the only true and real geopolitical bridge builder in this fractured and fragmented world that is willing to actually take the best from both worlds, from both geopolitical blocks, to navigate between the two blocks, to get into negotiations with the one or the other bloc. So there is no other example like India right now when it comes to this kind of meta level of international relations or the global system. If we assume that United States and China are the only systemic rivals, Russia, in my assessment, has sided with China already prior to 2022, has developed and built up the strategic axis of the Dragon Bear, which is, by definition, that's my definition of the Dragon Bear, is the strategic coordination in all systemically relevant domains between China and Russia. So for the period between 2013 and 2022, which enabled Russia also to launch a full-scale war on Ukraine. Without China, if it had not relied on this comprehensive coordination, Moscow would have never launched a full-scale war. So Russia is rather a joker. It's like a great power that has still large, the most, let's say, significant nuclear arsenal. It is a great power that has regional power projection. It is still able not just to control 18% of the second largest European state, but to actually is aiming for the security order in Europe. So it is still convinced that it can win in Ukraine and it can actually reshape the whole security order in Europe. But that is only possible because of the dragon bear. So on its own, Russia would have not been able to do that. So in a sense, it's a kind of a wild card in this systemic rivalry. It's not necessarily a middle power because you cannot neglect all these networks and obviously this systemic relationship with China. You cannot neglect that. So Russia is also in itself not necessarily on par with United States and with China, but with China, it creates a new kind of format. And then, of course, as I said, India is basically on its own. It bets on itself first and foremost. It doesn't want and it doesn't see itself in the future aligned with a specific bloc or with a specific country. It will be interfering in different kind of formations, actors, constellations, if necessary, everywhere in the world where it fits the Indian national interest. And that is, of course, a role and a position that requires a lot of energy and a lot of stamina. And also the price for this kind of strategic autonomy, for this hedging, for the ability to navigate without taking sides is very high. It's actually the highest, and this is basically what we observed, of course, with the sudden deterioration of the relationship, and then also with the unexpected, almost unexpected to most of the Indians and most of the observers, improvement of the US-India relationship.
Yeah, the only good point for Indians at this point of time is they must be thinking, hey, listen, we did not have to gift him a plane like the Saudis, the Qataris did, and they still get bombed. So, the Indians can be happy that at least we don't have to bribe Trump like that. But do you think the Trump administration is doing what any administration in America would have done? It's just that they are saying the quiet part out loud.
Well, it depends, because if it had been a Democratic administration, things would probably have been still quite centered around the status quo policy of the previous administration. More of the same what we were seeing, So like a status quo policy in terms of, trying to somehow preserve global and regional institutions, investing in global diplomacy, trying to save some of these alliances and partnerships. But the reality was such that, most of the partners of the Americans, not just the Europeans, but most of the partners, look at the Indo-Pacific partners like Australia, for instance. They were in a very strange relationship, because on the one hand, they were relying on the security umbrella of the Americans. They were relying on someone to take care of the security and defense portfolio, more or less. But then again, they were getting more and more involved in economic and trade relationship with the Chinese. So it was like, because of this status quo of the previous administration, things were not going well for the Americans. So basically, we might argue that, yes, of course, on the one hand, reputation of the US diplomacy or US institutionalism or multilateralism, or call it whatever you like, actually, would still have been preserved to some extent, with a very high price to pay. But there wasn't an added value for the American people coming out of this, because China was playing for time. They were already in the decoupling mode. It's just that they didn't want to decouple that quickly and that swiftly. So they wanted to take the time to prepare accordingly. I would argue they would have used the status quo policy in the best way possible. And then, of course, the war happened in Russia, with Russia, Ukraine. And basically, the Chinese were presented with an impossible situation because they also had to decide whether they side with the Americans against Russia and help the Americans to actually uh, defeat Russia diplomatically, economically, through isolation. You get the idea. Or they take the side of Russia and basically help Russia sustain the war and continue with the war and basically win the war in the long run. Now we know for a fact, because the Chinese diplomacy is no longer hiding it. In fact, they are openly admitting that it's not in the interest of China for Russia to lose the war against Ukraine. They have openly admitted it. But you get the idea that this kind of status quo policy of the previous administration would have not brought about the necessary outcome if we, let's say, define the outcome as the most successful trajectory for the US in terms of foreign security and defense policy. There will have not been the most successful trajectory. You will have had more and more military conflicts and wars. In fact, when Biden left office, the world was already facing the highest number of military conflicts and wars since the end of the Second World War, and obviously since the end of the Cold War. So qualitatively and quantitatively, the US as a global policeman was already facing a dire situation, and the Chinese were just not, contributing to global security. They were just more or less free riding on the matter, being focused on their own economic development and their own networks, their own alliances, partnerships, and so on and so forth. Now, with Trump, I will argue that Trump was only possible, and that's my own personal take on the matter. Trump was only possible to happen as a phenomenon in the US politics because of the dire global situation and because of the dire situation in the United States. Now, I don't know exactly how this is interrelated because I only look at the global geopolitics. I do not deal with internal dynamics. But to me, Trump is the perfect accelerator of the change and the shift. So basically, this kind of shift in global geopolitics that has been slowly going on, despite all the efforts of previous administrations to prevent it from happening, to stop it, to slow it down, is now being accelerated. As I said, the masks are off. This US administration is openly saying to the world that they are in a full competition, technological, economic, trade-like, energy-like, space-like, so defense, security, foreign policy, global diplomacy, regional, international organizations. Take whatever example you like. They are in a full competition, and they want to win it. So that's the world we are right now.
Yeah, but here's the problem. I actually agree with you that America is in a full-blown war with China. Now, something Balaji had said recently on X, where Balaji said the Chinese way and the American way were fundamentally different because of cultural nuances. The Eastern way has always been underplaying your prowess because the old Eastern adage is, hey, if you show your success, somebody else might copy you and you might create your own competitor. That's actually true because even Indians are like that. I know it sounds psychotic, but it is. I mean, I can't help it. That's how we are. So the Chinese were always underplaying their actual strengths. The American way is very braggadocious. And it's like the classic boxer's mentality where before going into a bout, I'm going to knock you out 500 times. Basketball is a quintessential American sport where the great basketball players will always go and say, I'm going to whack you, I'm going to slam dunk you, that kind of a thing. It's a very American thing. You don't see that in sport that originate outside of America. The Americans were always overestimating them. the Chinese were underestimating themselves. But if the Americans are in a full-blown war with China, how does any of the Trump administration's actions, where they tariff the shit out of everyone else but China, makes any sense? How does that make sense?
As I said already, we have to take a look at the relationship with China, even now the ongoing negotiations with China, from a very different lens. First and foremost, if we assume, like I said, I'm just presenting you my assessment, it's up to the audience to decide where they stand. But if we assume that my assessment is the correct one, and let's say we are already in this Cold War between America on the one side, Dragon Bear on the other. Now, what is the first realization? The first realization is I still need certain red lines. And these red lines are important because I don't want to get engaged militarily with my rival. So obviously, in a world of nuclear weapons, there is a clear red line, like the use of nuclear weapons, which is why all the nuclear blackmail coming from Russia the last 3.5 years, now Pakistan tried to exercise nuclear blackmail, is an absolute no-go. I mean, nuclear blackmail means basically the threat of use of nuclear weapons. So you're threatening that you will use the nuclear weapon, and by doing so, you exercise the psychological effect on the target population that basically translates them in some sort of political coercion, because the political leadership has to do something against it, right? That's the way how it works. And it worked quite well for someone like Putin, for instance, in the last 3.5 years, when he again and again threatened, not that he explicitly will use the nuclear weapon, but for instance, that a nuclear explosion might happen because there is a nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. So you get the idea. Now, the one thing is about the red lines. Second is about communication channels. If you have paid attention, the Americans and the Chinese have established the military-to-military communication, which is a clear signal, as it was the case during the First Cold War between United States and Soviet Union, that the generals, the general staff, they have to communicate. They have to prevent any kind of situations where there might be a misperception or miscalculation. And now we move to the tariffs. I would argue, and this was my initial statement when Trump came to power, I was, basically when he was elected, I was certainly factoring in tariffs, because he made it very clear that there will be tariffs. So my baseline scenario was that we might end up with something like an average 60% tariff for China and 10% for the rest of the world. I'm just giving you the foresight so that the audience can see where I was wrong, what did I basically see wrong, and so on. And I think that right now this is where we are. It has to be, so that's why we had like this escalation of threats that you might end up with 145 or 125% on both sides. There are specific leverages that can be used now, and we saw that with China, for instance, blocking the exports of rare earths, for instance, of rare earths that are important for the defense sector. So there has to be found the right scale of escalation, and this is where they are right now. They are like tapping. It's a new terrain for both. So China is not going to let it without a fight. That's obvious. But the point is that neither United States nor China want this to escalate to a point where they can lose the control. Again, it's not about the military confrontation. That's, I think, a good news. So all of this is happening below the threshold of a military confrontation between the United States and China, or between United States and Russia. That's good news. But now the bad news is that, as you have clearly, they have clearly communicated this to each other. They know that because they have the internal channels of communication. Now they have the full spectrum of the hybrid warfare. They can use all the tools. They can instrumentalize, commodities dependencies, and China has a significant portion of the production, the processing of the mining, the processing of rare earths, and critical raw materials. It can exercise this. Then China has, of course, is a trade partner number one of most of the world, so they can politicize this as well. There are plenty of ways how to navigate this relationship. So that's why we are now seeing a very different format happening between United States and China as they are trying to find the avenue for coordination of this rivalry, how to manage the competition in the most sane way, so that they do not destroy themselves in the process, and by extension the world as well. Everybody is interconnected with everybody else, and this is the hard part. This is the big difference, as contrary to the first Cold War, because in the first Cold War each one had their own bloc and they were not interconnected with each other. So when the Soviet Union imploded and basically was defeated in this competition between two superpowers, defeated on its own, there wasn't a wave of ripple effects on the rest of the world. Now, each one of these moves, if you have made too many wrong moves, will have ripple effects on the whole of the world. And it will have ripple effects much bigger than the ones we saw during the 2007-2008 global financial economic crisis. It's an uncharted water, and this is why it takes time. It's a different frame. You should not put the US-China relationship into any of the other boxes. So it's too complex, and it's going to last for much longer, I suppose, for the whole period of the Trump administration. They will be dealing with this issue. And same goes for Xi Jinping, who is having his issues right now at home. There are a lot of internal turmoil developments linked to his leadership, linked to different fractions of their leadership, linked to the economy, linked to the to restructuring of the economy, and so on and so forth. So this is where we are.
So where does this? Maybe this is a two-part question. A, where does this leave India and Russia in this fight between America and China? And also, like organizations like the Quad or the BRICS, and kind of, let's say, what is India, Switzerland at scale right now? That's what India is right now. What is India exactly?
You mean what is India exactly in the context of this regional?
Yeah, basically, like Switzerland is also there, like us, right? We just give everyone weapons wherever we can. We don't bother about their internal fights. See, Indian foreign policy has always been, we will not pick a side. That's Indian foreign policy always. The only side India picks is where is the benefit for India. Obviously, India is not going to go with genocidal maniacs, but the point is that nobody's hands are clean in global geopolitics. You can't say America does not have blood on its hand, or Russia doesn't have blood on its hands, or the Chinese don't have blood on its hands. And as a non-aligned in the Nehruvian times and multilateral in Modi's times, I mean, India's stand is very clear. But then there are organizations like the Quad. I don't know what the Quad does. I don't know what the BRICS is doing. Basically, where does this leave? Because if as you've always said, India plays a very pivotal role, and so what is that role? And also, what does the Saudi Pakistan Defense Pact do, uh, when we look at it from that? Like, are the Saudis doing it without the Americans telling them? I'm not that naive. Like, I was not born yesterday. Like, Saudis can't do anything without the Americans giving them a go ahead.
Well, this is not one question. These are several questions that you have actually asked. Maybe to start with regional formations, then move to India's positioning once again. Then there is the question of India-Russia, and then there is the question of Saudi-Pakistan relationship. The regional organizations and formations, these are rather loose formations. These are not heavily institutionalized formats, but these are more or less loose formats that do not necessitate the existence of an institution with an institutional body, administration, so on and so forth. For instance, the quadrilateral format is such an example, which brings together for countries in the Indo-Pacific that share, let's say, similar vision of the way how they want the Indo-Pacific region to develop. They bet on free navigation and basically have more or less shared vision and understanding of how they want to explore the opportunities linked to the Indo-Pacific region. And these are the countries of, these are the US, India, Australia, and Japan. And it actually, the quadrilateral format will continue to exist exactly because of that, because it's not institutionalized format. I can assure you that it's going to be more or less about exchange, so that administrations and different delegations from these countries on specific topics, whether it's about supply chains or it's about technological cooperation or it's about maritime lines. You get the idea. There will be this exchange in the future as well. Similarly, BRICS, meanwhile, BRICS Plus is a loose formation that emerged actually from the idea of how to develop the economies together, in a kind of a coordinated manner. And BRIC originally stems also from Goldman Sachs and stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China, which at that time, long ago, decades ago, were projected to become among the fastest growing economies in the world. If you take a look at China, if you take a look at India, this kind of forecast at the time is, in the case of China, it has obviously already happened. In the case of Russia and Brazil, there is a lot of room for improvement. But if you listen to the Russian president, he claims that Russia, after restructuring the war economy, is on a good trajectory. We are about to see that, whether this is really going to happen or not. Brazil is a significant middle power, not only in Latin America, but it's a significant commodities provider, significant grain provider. In fact, BRICS Plus is seen as the future. If we take the example of OPEC Plus as this conglomerate of oil exporters, key oil exporters, BRICS Plus is seeing itself as the future conglomerate of the key fossil fuels / grain exporters in the world. So it has to become a kind of a powerhouse of commodities, where obviously one big topic is how to boost trade with each other based on national currency. So you want to not, some are dreaming of de-dollarization, like the current Brazilian leader, Lula. Others are just doing it out of necessity because they are sanctioned, like the case of Russia. Thirds just want to push for their own currency, like the case of China. And India is there because it has a lot of potential as, again, the not just the fastest growing economy right now, but it's projected to continue to grow above on the average 6 to 7%, which is significant positive forecast. And for that, it needs a lot of commodities. It needs a lot of partners. So it needs a stability of supply. It needs, for instance, in the case of Russia, so I move immediately to the Russia-China portfolio. What many do not understand is when now, of course, the issue of the oil suddenly emerged, is that it was the US administration, the previous US administration, that actually facilitated together with the other G7 countries, facilitated this oil cap on the Russian oil, so that they impose a geoeconomic pain on the Russian economy. So they kept the price of Russian oil at $60 US dollars per barrel. And at the same time, they said, but India should actually continue and should buy more Russian oil so that there is not a significant interruption on the global oil market. You understand that when you have a globalized oil market, in the case customers are diversifying from one supplier, like it was the case with the European customers, diversifying away from Russia. So they are taking away actually the supply that was meant, for instance, for Asian customers. This happened, by the way, also during the COVID crisis with the gas, and later with the war as well, with the Russian war. So you get the idea that it was actually arranged to happen that way. It was desired to happen that way so that there is not a big oil shock on the market that would lead to a surge of the oil price beyond 100, let's say 100 plus US dollars per barrel. And in the case of India just went for its interest and tried to actually maximize its own gain by starting to buy the Russian oil. But in the reality is such that if we were to remove the Russian oil from the global market, there is not enough supply coming from the others that would replace the Russian oil. Okay, there is not enough supply to replace the Russian oil on the market. So you understand what will happen actually with the price. Now, oil is one thing, and yes, meanwhile, as we speak, there is almost 40% of it. But it's not just about the oil. This relationship goes back to the Cold War. It was a relationship that was important for both sides. In the case of India, if you look at it from the Indian perspective, the Soviet Union was basically the important voice in the UN Security Council and beyond when it came to Kashmir, when it came to also the occurring conflicts with Pakistan. So it was actually supporting the Indian position. But also in terms of commodities, so arms sales were a big issue of the portfolio of the bilateral relationship, which at the time when the Russian war began against Ukraine, it was beyond 50%, 54, 56%. Now, meanwhile, India is diversifying away from Russia, not for the sake of actually scaling down the relationship with Russia, but for the sake of its own independence. So it's increasing the number of suppliers, the number of joint ventures and collaborations. It is collaborating with the US, it's collaborating with regional partners, with Europeans, and it's still also collaborating with the Russians. And then there is also the big portfolio of other commodities, which are like fertilizers, for instance, which is very important as India is a significant producer of grain. And actually, I think, if I'm not wrong, even wheat producing number one in the world. You understand that if you have to feed 1.5 billion people, you have to make sure that you have cheap, transparent, and incredible supply of fertilizers for your production. So this is maybe a kind of the short wrap up why this relationship is so important. There are also other dimensions of the bilateral relationship, and here more or less the trajectory is quite clear. And that is a trajectory in which Russia, China see themselves as these two kind of pillars of a relationship that they are bringing from the past, that has been modified in the present and will stand the test of the time in the future. That's the understanding, more or less. Now, going to and of course, maybe one important point is that there is a certain worry in the Indian leadership when it comes to the dragon bear. But again, looking from the context of normalization of relations between China and India, which I argue has been the best geopolitical news in 2024, it has nothing to do with Trump. It has nothing to do with the US in itself. So it must be made a very clear distinction that it was about the strategic necessities of the region, of these two economic giants. for the sake of predictability, for the sake of making sure that this economic growth forecast on both sides continues, making sure that investors are still eager to come. So there was a need to do this because you had only two options, more or less, in the South Asian region, either to normalize with China or to normalize with Pakistan. You know that this was for many reasons impossible at the time, and as we saw with the most recent escalation, it was basically the relationship went exactly in the other direction with Pakistan. So in a sense, what happened between China and India was a pragmatic and realpolitik based rapprochement between Delhi and Beijing. That, of course, we can argue will have its issues in the long run. So we just stay in the present. And if we move from this relationship to the Saudi-Pakistan relationship, now again, clearly one big function of the exciting times we live is that, Pakistan is also a middle power. It also has something to offer. From American perspective, it offers leverage. The Americans want to come back in South Asia. Now, one way, of course, is through collaboration with India. It's already happening. Think of all the domains where US-India relations are improving and deepening right now. Technological exchange, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. But now, of course, it's also about geopolitical leverage. And because India, as we explained already, has its own very clear understanding of its position, the next possibility, especially given the overwhelming Chinese presence in Pakistan, think of the economic corridor connecting China with basically giving China leverage in the Indian Ocean through the Gwadar port and so on and so forth. I mean, we can give a lot of examples. Here, the Americans decided to re-enter the South Asian region. And think just of the statements that Trump made about Afghanistan yesterday. So you get the idea. And the second, of course, so it goes beyond this ego projection about the Nobel Peace Prize. It goes much, much more beyond that. I mean, Pakistan used the opportunity to get the, to play its card the best way it can. So to maximize its gain in the situation during and after the escalation with India, there has been certainly a kind of a mediation process when it comes to Pakistan, that's for sure. But the point here is that now, because of this transactional period in the international relations, because of what I already outlined, realpolitik is back, global powers, global system competition, great powers competition is back. Big issue is going to be about nuclearization, about nuclear weapons. And since there are not so many countries that are in the possession of nuclear weapons, now Pakistan is suddenly a middle power because of its possession, not just because of its geographic position, but also because of its possession of nuclear weapons. And since we have the big issue in the Middle East with the possible nuclearization, that is the acquisition of nuclear weapons by Iran, which Israel hasn't settled with its attacks on Iran. So it did not achieve the main goal of its attacks on Iran. It did not destroy the nuclear facilitations and so on and so forth. You get the idea here. There is still a regional player in the Middle East that is convinced that it can acquire the nuclear weapons. So, of course, this creates a chain of reactions. And the immediate chain of reaction is that Saudi Arabia is also going to go after nuclear weapons. It's going to try to make sure that it has an access to nuclear weapons. Now, it cannot acquire them from Israel. So who is the next to actually to make sure that there is an access, that you have actually opened the door to possible nuclearization, and that's Pakistan. So one of the main reasons why the Saudi-Pakistan pact is now happening, it's not because Pakistan will defend Saudi Arabia militarily. In the case of, let's assume, Israeli attack on Saudi Arabia, it's not that, as it's been discussed right now in the media and on social media, but it's more about this actually regional axis. You have Turkey, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Pakistan, you have the optionality of nukes in the future. Turkey, because you mentioned at the beginning also about military power projection and how middle powers, how many actually middle powers are in the position to exercise power projection in military terms. How many, of course, in this case, how few, as you named them. But Turkey is one such example. And because of the new realities in the Middle East, with the new regional hegemon in the Middle East, which is Israel, this immediately created these ripple effects, where now Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia are taking the necessary steps to make sure that there will be a solid and credible counterweight to this growing Israeli power projection. Now, I would assume that this all also happened not without the knowledge of the US administration. So again, you clearly see how behind the curtains there are certain, or let's put it differently, these are kind of proxy developments. Proxy wars is the one side of the coin, but the other side of the coin is where, when China and United States are trying to somehow interfere or meddle or also exercise influence on certain actors' constellations.
All right, just one last question before we wrap up. Somebody has asked this: why would the Saudis buy nukes from them? B, will America ever allow that? That is also another very important thing. So maybe the Americans want them to have nukes. I don't know. Only America knows what America wants, because America can't decide what it wants in a whole week. And also, why don't you see any proxy wars economically in South America? Is it because it's pretty much America ruling over the entire lot?
Who says that I don't see any proxy wars in South America? We just haven't discussed South America. We were only focused, for the lack of time. We have like 60 minutes. For 60 minutes, you cannot cover the whole map. But there are proxy wars happening in South America as well. I just gave the example about Panama, Canada, and Greenland. You have to look at it from the perspective of the ambitions of United States to create counterweight to the dragon bear in the Arctic, and to make sure that critical choke points in the Pacific are actually under American control. It's much more about the revival of the Monroe Doctrine. Right now, as we speak, there is a significant military operation happening, has been in preparation. There have been first steps already in this military operation against Venezuela, and that there will be some other kind of interfering, because it's, again, everything that's is happening right now is more or less below the threshold of a kinetic war between United States, China, and Russia. But everything else, unfortunately, is absolutely on in the playbook, is absolutely on the agenda, and that includes, of course, also military conflicts and the use of military power with the green light of one or other great power. And that's the situation with South America. We haven't discussed it only because of matter of time. When it comes to nukes and whether the United States will give green light for the acquisition of nukes, I don't know. Nobody knows. I think that nobody can answer this question. I think that we are opening a new Pandora box. We are in again, it's very important for me to highlight, we are in uncharted waters. Every day there is at least one headline that we are discussing as something that has never happened before, right? And we are either outraged or we are surprised, but we are in uncharted waters of geopolitics. What I look at are the concrete patterns of behavior based on systems analysis, based on historical parallels, based on interplay of various variables, mostly linked to trend projections, risk analysis, and strategic foresight. So it's a very different kind of analysis that I conduct that very often doesn't make sense because of the daily noise, but it makes sense if you put it in the long-term context and picture. And yes, there will be, so the trend projection is absolutely clear. There will be more nuclear powers because of the times. One way how to make sure that you are, you remain relevant and you are able to defend yourself is through the acquisition of nuclear weapons. And because right now we are no longer in this first Cold War, again, it's a very complex picture, very interconnected. It's the era of weaponization of everything. So if you have a leverage over something, you will weaponize it to a certain extent. You will use it against others. And basically nuclear weapons are seen by many now as this kind of life insurance for your sovereignty, territorial sovereignty. So I wouldn't exclude. So my trend projection is that there will be more countries in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, maybe even in Europe, trying to get nuclear weapons or get themselves under the nuclear umbrella of a nuclear power, nuclear nation, for the sake of their territorial sovereignty. That's my call.
Well, as they said, being a nuclear power makes sure mutually assured destruction is guaranteed, and that leads to more peaceful world. That's what the smart ones said. Let's see what happens in the future. I don't know whether America will let these things happen, because no powerful nation likes to secede or let somebody else take that place. At least not willingly. Uh, so let's see what happens in the future. But Velina, I know you have to go. So once again, thank you very much for coming. As always, it was a pleasure talking to you, and keep making those wonderful observations, and we'll keep talking regularly.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's always a big pleasure talking to you.
All right, guys, we'll wrap it up right now. But before we wrap it up, once again, Velina's handle on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, is there in the description of the podcast. Go follow her. Also, I have the link to her website. Go check it out. Whatever you guys want to subscribe to, all the details will be there. As far as Velina is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, you know the drill. As far as the Cārvāka podcast is there, if you can join the membership program of the Cārvāka podcast, do consider joining it, or you can send your donations to UPI or Interac Canada. You can buy the Cārvāka podcast merchandise and buy my book, Nastic. If you can't do any of that, just like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment in the comment section. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Have a great time.